Good evening and welcome to the Talkback for tonight's movie, My Name is Sara, sponsored by the Jewish Link of New Jersey. My name is Daniel Reinhold, a Teaneck resident of 14 years now, and I'm honored to be joined by quite the panel for tonight's Talkback, all of whom have extensive resumes that I'm going to have to abridge so that we get more time to actually hear from them. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you first Stephen Oritt, the director of My Name is Sara. Stephen began in music videos, working with artists including the Foo Fighters and One Republic, before moving into making award-winning documentaries, beginning with American Native, the story of the Ramapo Indians living right here in the hills of New Jersey. Stephen then launched James Lucy Productions that, among many other projects, produced My Name is Sara, which is Stephen's narrative feature debut. And we should note, and it won't surprise you to hear this, having just seen the film, that it's garnered 5 Best Feature awards from the film festivals at which it has already appeared. We're also joined by Andy Entrata, executive producer of the movie, who actually grew up locally in Englewood Cliffs, graduated from Dwight Morrow High School. Andy is the son of a Holocaust survivor and is thus extremely involved in organizations dedicated to tolerance and Holocaust remembrance. He serves on the executive committees of both the USC Shoah Foundation and the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation. And like Stephen, Andy was executive producer of documentary films for many years prior to working on My Name is Sara. We also welcome Dr. Dennis B. Klein, Kean University Professor of History and Director of the Jewish Studies Program and MA Program in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Prior to joining the university, Dennis served as founding director of the Anti-Defamation League's Brown Center of Holocaust Studies and its Hidden Child Foundation, about which we'll be hearing a little later. He's editor-in-chief of Dimensions, Journal of Holocaust Studies, and is the author or editor of 7 books. Also of relevance for next film festival, Dennis is on the Teaneck Board of Education. And last, but by no means least, and frankly, that's an understatement, we are delighted to have with us Fanny Wedro. Fanny is herself a survivor, 94 years young, born in Oritt, who personally knew Sara. It goes without saying she has quite the story to tell, some of which I hope she'll be able to share with us during our panel. So I'll just mention that she spent 6 months in a work ghetto in Oritt, subsequently lived hiding in the forest for 18 months. And ultimately, Fanny was liberated by the Russians in 1944 and eventually reached a displaced persons camp in Linz, Austria, where she became a teacher and met and married her husband, Leo. In 1948, they immigrated to Canada, and it's in Calgary where we find her tonight. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us. I want to begin with a question for Andy and maybe Stephen. But just in terms of how you came upon this story and decided to make it your first feature.
Well, I'd say it was really serendipity. Steve and I had made some documentary films together, and for me, it's a hobby. I'm an investor and asset manager, but always fancied art and liked art projects. And Steve, this is his profession, so he's the real expert. And so I kind of stumbled on this story through the mother of my friend, Nikki Shapiro, that is Sara, and just speaking to her about some of her past. This story kind of evolved, and even Nikki, her son, didn't know because she wasn't comfortable to discuss all these details. And that was the germ of it. So once I heard the story, Mickey and we traveled overseas. That was the purpose of me speaking to his mom in the first place, because he wanted to go to see where his parents grew up. He himself was born after the war in a displaced persons camp in Germany, Mickey. It hadn't been back there since he left in 1949, so it goes way back. And when I came back about a month later, I talked with Steve about it and said, this is the most incredible story. What do you think about it? Do you think there's maybe a movie here? And that was the beginning of it. That was now the project, went from the beginning to completion, and here we are today.
Wow. And Stephen, actually, it's interesting, given your both of your backgrounds in documentaries. Was there a specific reason that you thought this was better as a feature rather than making a documentary, I suppose, of the story?
Yes. Well, Sarah, she had given two testimonies, one to the USC Shoah Foundation and one to the United States Holocaust Museum. And as Andy mentioned, he sent me those. I watched them, and they're a bit over an hour and a half in length. And Sarah, she told the same facts through both. The facts were consistent, but there was plenty of space within those facts. But the facts that she did recount consistently, to me, presented a framework for a very compelling story about the Holocaust, because it really isn't about the Holocaust per se. It's really more, in my opinion, about the human experience and human relationships that this young woman has to forge in order to survive. And so ultimately, I think in order to do a documentary, we probably would not have been able to find enough primary source material. And Sarah, at that point, wasn't even a willing subject. She at that point was suffering from dementia, so we weren't able to have her as an interview subject. And we all agreed that we felt that this would be a really beautiful opportunity to make a nuanced film that really kind of looks more like the gray area of war than necessarily the black and the white.
Right. And do you want to tell us a little bit about the making of the movie and about the star of the movie, Sarah herself, who I believe this was her first movie appearance?
Sure. So we shot the entire thing in Poland, in eastern Poland near Białystok. And our entire crew was a Polish crew. There's a very rich history of filmmaking in Poland, so there's an enormous amount of talent there. We got very fortunate that we were able to really work with the top artists in the industry across the board. Most of our cast were very well-known Polish stars, actors, but we were very deliberate about casting German speakers for the German roles, Russian speakers for the Russian roles. And we started looking initially for our main character, knowing that if we didn't have an actress for Sarah, then it would be going to be quite difficult to make a film. And we initially started looking at all of the professional actresses in a 12 to 18-year-old range in Eastern Europe, or even some parts of Western Europe, and nobody really fit the bill. And the casting director and I decided to do an open casting call in Poland, and she went to 6 cities in Poland and literally put up flyers on telephone poles and saw about 150, 125 young women in each of those towns, and then narrowed that down to about 75 and sent me the links from each of those 6 cities. And ultimately, one of them was the young woman who we cast, Zuzana Sorowi, and she's from southern Poland, not very far from Auschwitz, and had never acted before. She never even took a drama, so much as a drama class, but she was passionate about it. And I was immediately very impressed with her ability to pull off this performance.
Yeah, so I mean, it struck me, I'm sure everybody, in a movie like this, it would be very easy to go for kind of, some grand histrionics, and instead there's it's a much more kind of, measured performance, and really, very mature actually, which is incredible for a first-time actress. Can I turn to you, Fanny, and just ask you initially, tell us a little bit about your own memories of this period, if you can share with us some of your own experience.
Well, the memories, if I would give, and now wouldn't be enough, but since I got to a few seconds, well, what can I say? The memories is when they came into the Germans, I don't have to tell you. They slaughtered us. That's it. They just gathered people and killed them. That's what it was, which no one knew about us, They just, in 1942, we were unified before they opened up the crematoriums. And that's why we're the hidden Holocaust. Calling Holocaust by bullet, because a bullet per person, and no one knew about us. So what can I tell you what I remember? A lot of I remember, but it's not now the time to tell all that. It's all about Sara now. So the way I ran away, and I was hiding in the forest, and so there was the will to survive. That's all it was, the will to survive, and to get nekama. Nekama, that means revenge. I found later that revenge you don't get when you kill someone or so. There's many ways to get revenge, but we were so like savages. Those days I could have killed someone, I wouldn't have cared, whatever. But anyway, when we were liberated, we came to courts, and I met Sara. We called her Sule with the red Beckelach, Sara with the red cheeks. She had beautiful, beautiful black curly hair. She was a cute little girl and so on. And I didn't know her before the war, before all that. I knew the name Guralnick. Guralnick were very prominent people and very wealthy people. And it's a big mishpoch, a big family, and they lived in Koretz. They lived in Bogdanovka, which is about 5 or 8 kilometers from Koretz. So, but when the killing was done, the mass killing, Daxia, they brought from the villages into the city. So it was a mass killing. So when I met Sara, so we stayed both in the same house. I mean, I was that time 16, she was 13, so 16 and a half, she was 13 and a half. So, I mean, we were the two of us. So we stayed together in one house, at Kindelman's house. And I stayed until she got her cousin, Fanny. She had also Fanny. I don't know her last name. And she was in South America somewhere. And we didn't call him Asa, but Isaac Shapiro. We heard that because Isaac Shapiro's sister, we were staying together. Shapiro's sister, Ita Shapiro, which was Miki's auntie, Sara, me. We stayed in quite a few more people. We stayed. When it came that you've got to go to Poland, whoever was a Polish citizen before the war could leave Russia. So we went, and Sara was left. And I lost track of Sara, until I came to Montreal. We came to a wedding, and a very pretty little lady walked in, and I says, "May I ask you who you are?" She says, "I'm Sara Shapiro." So much pride in the team. And I said, and I looked deep into her. I said, "Are you Sura Mederator Beckeler?" He said, "Yes." And that's how we got back in touch. And when I went to see them in Arizona. We were in touch 2-3 times a week. We were on the phone constantly. And there was another one which was in Winnipeg. So the three of us, we had a network constantly. And the last time I saw her, when I came to Detroit, because I tracked down Father Dubois, because he was the one. What made me actually Father Dubois? Because when I looked at on the first page, in the side of the page, it says that he was in Bogdanovka. Bogdanovka, it's a hip place. Who would ever think about Bogdanovka, a village? And he was there. So when I saw Bogdanovka, and I've been fighting constantly, everybody poo-pooed me. What? You're not a Holocaust survivor. What's there? You went to Auschwitz, you haven't got a number, and so on. So when I saw Bogdanovka, I said, this man, and then I noticed the red book. It was in Korchini. Ukrainian years ago used to call it Korchini. So I went to track down Father Dubois, and I went to Father. I found out that he's in Detroit. So I went to Detroit, and I met Father Dubois. And then I While I was in the drawing, I went to see Sara. Sara wasn't feeling well already. And Isaac, we called him Isaac, they called him Asa, was already, didn't know, he was very ill. And Sara, she was not, but just the same, we still carried on a conversation with Sara. And that's the last I saw of Sara. And the next time what I saw is Sara's story on a film. And that's how, and I remember Sara as the beautiful little girl with the red cheeks and the beautiful, beautiful curly hair. Beautiful child. And that's the way I knew Sara.
Thank you, Fanny.
Thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor, a great honor for me to be invited and to, in Sara's memory. Thank you.
No, I mean, the honor is genuinely ours to have you here joining us. And just, you know, it's just incredible that having just, you know, watched this movie and then to hear, you know, personal memories bringing it to life in that way is really quite something. Thank you, Fanny. Dennis, if I can come to you, and as I do so, I'm just going to mention that those of you who are watching, you can, if you have questions for any of our panelists, you can put them in Ovi and they will come to me to put to our panel. So please do feel free so I don't hog it all. But Dennis, maybe you can tell us something about, mentioned in your bio, the Hidden Child Foundation, which, and Sarah's story is a little bit different in this context, but if you, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work there and what that is.
Yes, thank you. And really thank everyone else on this panel. Extraordinary production, and finding your story, I agree, was so very moving, as is the movie. So we founded the Hidden Child Foundation at the Anti-Defamation League in 1990. So we're really into a 30-year run right now, still very active. In fact, there's a group in Teaneck of hidden children who gathered together informally to continue their relationships and stories. So it's still a very vibrant kind of a concept. The reason I believe that this foundation actually got off the ground as it did is that there was a great deal of attention at the time and before to those who survived, to look at the subject of the Holocaust from the perspective of those who were victimized. Until that point, actually, this was already well underway. We were just capitalizing on it, but for the most part, the story of the Holocaust was told from the perspective, right, of perpetrators, of the Nazis, as we know. But that had begun to shift in a rather significant way, and we really wanted to, therefore, get on that so-called bandwagon to begin to tell a story that wasn't told so much, and that is the story we saw tonight, the experiences of those who went into hiding to become, as we referred to them, as child survivors. And I believe that was an accurate way of depicting this particular film. And I really love, I think, Stephen, you were the one who said that you are really looking for I took the note down on this one, looking at the gray area. And I think that is so considerably important in works of like what we saw this evening, and trying to really go deeper than what the facts could ever tell us into an experience, right? And so, Fanny, your story and testimony is so very important. And I think the film we saw tonight was really able to get into the heart and soul of an experience of not only hiding, but one of complete abandonment. And that, I think, you portrayed extremely well in how those who were trying to endure this experience for God knows how long, no one, of course, at the time would have known, and yet to have that feeling of abandonment, that there was just nobody there to truly lend reliable support, that all trust would erode. And I think you conveyed that experience quite well.
Thank you. So just one thing we have had in the comments that I'll just mention is a lot of appreciation for sharing your story, Fanya. That kind of everybody watching is very appreciative of that. Stephen, I want to just ask you, I realize that questions with a movie like this based on fact, questions about which bits are true and which not, is not necessarily relevant to the emotional truth of a movie like this. But I imagine people might be interested to know about the storyline of the Catholic priest, whether that's based on truth or if not, the thought process behind that element of the movie. If you want to speak to that, Stephen.
Sure. You learn in film school when you're learning about storytelling. The first thing is that really one of the things they tell you is to have an active character. It's very hard to have a passive character. It's the result of the experiences that are happening around them. Whereas if you have an active character that's going, clearly we know what that person wants. It's somebody that you invest more in as a viewer and watching. But we knew we had inherent difficulty because we wanted to stay accurate to Sarah's story. She, in her own words, oftentimes played a mute. Well, the first time that I met her, when Andy introduced me to her, the first question I asked her is, how does a young child survive such an experience? And she said immediately by listening and not talking. She only spoke when spoken to, and really rarely spoke. And so we knew we had a passive character, but in order to reflect some of what she wanted, this character wanted, but wasn't able to demonstrate, we invented a few characters, the priest being one of them. We knew that she went to church with the family every Sunday. We knew that she was tested continually with the rituals of the Orthodox Church. And there are a number of factual experiences that we did base the priest character on, but nothing that Sara ever spoke of in her testimony that led us to create this character. We just thought that, we knew that she was going to church, and we knew that she would have to ultimately do confession, and that could be, potentially a provocative moment for this priest character to, potentially see what her true story is.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, it was certainly very effective. That particular strand. We've had a question from the audience, and I guess this would be for either Andy or Stephen. It says whether we know what happened to the Ukrainian family that took her in.
We actually, before we filmed, we went and tried to track down the two boys. Both became military guys in Soviet Army and passed away in the one, I think, in the 80s and one in the 90s. And they were probably like in their 50s. They were young when they passed away. The parents had another child after the war, a girl, and we met her.
Oh, wow.
And she was quite a bit younger. I think we met I would have been in, Steve, 2015, maybe 15 or
16.
And she had been born, say, in 49 or 50, something like that. So she was a few years after the war ended. And we asked if she had any knowledge of this. She said, well, I know there was some girl lived with us, a Jewish girl lived with the family, but didn't know any detail. It was a little bit pejorative, like, Steve, where there was some type of like comment. She's a very nice lady. She lives in a town. She didn't live in Oritt. She lived in Rovno, I think.
Rovno, yeah.
Not far away, but like 50 miles away. But her brothers had passed away, and she was left. The house where they lived is gone, and then when they retired, the parents passed away, and the house is abandoned. Not the one that's portrayed in the movie, but one that is in the actual town of Bogdanovka, which is where the action took place, let's say.
Right. Actually, yeah, there's something that's come up about Father Dubois, which is just who Fanya mentioned. Father Dubois has been responsible for locating a lot of the kind of unmarked mass graves and kind of searching those out, and has been, you know, an incredible sort of friend to the Jews and to Holocaust memorializing. And if there's anything else, Dennis, maybe if you or Fanny want to say more about him, but somebody had just asked, so I thought I should quickly mention that. We have, Fanny was mentioning actually earlier, and I think it would be something worth the audience knowing. Fanny, you mentioned the accuracy of the portrayal in the movie of the location. If you just want to maybe repeat something you said earlier to Stephen about that and Oritt's as portrayed in the movie.
Oh, you mean the Intercochi?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was very, very impressed because it just looked exactly like Corbett's. You know, the building that was Feldman's house, when they took us to, they marched us down to the death already. So we had to take off the coats, jewelry. That was in that house. And it was on Monastyrsky Street. And when I looked at it, I said, and in the front was a market, not far from we saw the house was the market. So I was so impressed. I said, girl, look how they did it. It's Corbett's, you know. No matter how bad memories I have from Corbett's, but it's still Corbett's touches me the minute it's mentioned Corbett's. And then I found later out it was at Tokochin. But I happened to be in Tokochin. When I found out Tokochin, I said, that must have been the synagogue in Tokochin. It was so well done. It was so beautifully done. Very impressed, very impressed. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, Fanny was mentioning earlier to Stephen how, you know, was it Oritt's, because it looked so accurate. So something worth bringing up. A general question really can go to all of you, but maybe I'll start with you, Dennis, given your involvement in Holocaust education. And that's just about the role you think movies like this, art in general, maybe have to play in Holocaust education. Dennis, we'll start with you, but please, afterwards, whoever wishes can chime in on that one. Dennis.
Yeah, well, I would pick up again on a phrase that we've referred to in this discussion, and that is the value of emotional truth. I mean, I believe this is really what good filmmaking, and by the way, good fiction always can do for us. It really isn't about the facts, and I appreciate the reference. Again, I think, Steve, you made the reference to working with Sara's testimonies to make sure that the facts are consistent. I would only argue that the consistency of the facts is not getting at really the experience. And I believe the emotional truth, where we may find the contradiction of facts, nonetheless, there's a deeper truth at play here. So I believe, again, it has to be done well. And I think we had an example of that this evening, is when you can really begin to understand what we are looking for here. And that is if we can somehow grasp the experience of those who went through an impossible situation. I found myself, when I watched the film, feeling a little bit claustrophobic. You know, it had that impact on me. And I think that is a tribute to your filmmaking, because of course that was the experience. Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else want to add anything there? We have, if not, a question for Stephen, which is about the decision to have the actors speak English rather than Polish, subtitled in English as with German speakers. Stephen, you want to?
Yeah, so that was a decision that we made pretty early on after we committed to writing the script, at least, was to make the majority of the film in English. It starts in Poland, and therefore Sara and her brother, when they were escaping, were speaking Polish. But then when she gets to Ukraine, we made the switch that Ukrainian is English. And we made the film predominantly for an American audience, which is somewhat ironic because it still hasn't been released in the United States. It's been released internationally. We started our festival run internationally, and it's been very well received internationally. But we were due to be released theatrically in June of 2020, and the film has been on hold ever since then. We're now due to be released in May of 2022. Yeah, I'm not a Ukrainian speaker. I did not think that making a film in Ukrainian, it being my first film, would result in the same success, I guess, that we ultimately felt is that we got with our current film.
Right. Yeah.
And the only other thing I guess that I would just add about the previous question is, and Andy and I first started talking about this film even before Mickey really had given, was on board. Really, Mickey wasn't looking to make this film, but because we knew that we were in a very exceptional, advantageous position, that we could really do this ourselves. Some of our earliest conversation with Andy and I was like, that we knew that we needed to maintain accuracy, but also that sentimentality and melodrama would kill this story. And so we really, tried to again kind of focus more on as you said, Dennis, the emotional truth, and that's ultimately something that you intuit when you don't really know the entirety of the story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of kind of show not tell in movies, and I think that's something that you get rather than kind of having to give constant exposition, just in the gaps, so to speak. And also something I mentioned actually in an email to you, Stephen, that the juxtaposition of what is just some stunningly beautiful scenery through the seasons in the kind of the sun and the fall and the snow, juxtaposed with this much darker content. And I think that juxtaposition in the movie, it also just does something that's really very, very effective. And I assume that's something that is very intentional. We have a question. Sorry, do you want to come in on that? My apologies. No. A question for Fania, asking whether you were in a displaced persons camp, and if so, for how long, and what that was like.
You mean in the DP camp?
Mm-hmm.
This place? Yes, I was. I came there 45, 3 years, almost 3 years. I was there almost 3. So, right. Yeah, and one thing I can tell you, we weren't refugees for very long. We made sure we didn't want charity. Even though they gave us food and everything, each one found a job. I found a job. I was teaching. I earned my money, so I wouldn't take it from the UNRWA. And when we were, and everybody, I think in 1950, all the camps, that's it, no more DP camps. We were absorbed. We went to between Israel, between United States, Canada, I don't know, some to Australia, some all over the world. And we made a very good living. We integrated. And believe me, no country, especially Canada, should be proud of refugees like us, because we pay big tax to the government, and we're lucky. We are happy to pay it. We kiss the ground, they let us in, and so on. So it was the DP camp was a transition, and we made a very, so to say it was 100% good, no, but it wasn't bad. To me, it was heaven compared what we went through. Being at the DP camp at 7, just the same. Nobody wanted charity. So,
right. as you say, you were a teacher there, and I believe you met your
Yeah.
husband there too. Is that correct?
Yeah, I met my husband, and then we immigrated. He immigrated separate. I came as a domestic, because those days they took only people with the same name and farmers. And he had a father, which had a brother in Edmonton, in Canada. And they didn't see each other for 40 years, and he died before he saw his brother. Well, that's faith. But actually, we were going to go to Israel. That was our idea, being in the DP camp. But they didn't take those days people, elderly people. And my father was 60 years old. Those days, 60 was an old man. And so they wouldn't take him to go to Israel. So that's why he was staying in the camp. Through the Red Cross, he found his brother in Canada. So my husband went, and I signed myself up as a domestic, and I came as a domestic, worked the contract, and worked in Canada as a cleaning lady. Now, it didn't hurt me. Believe me, I'm proud of it. We raised a family, and we can really say we came up from ashes. And we're so happy to pay tax. I'm not happy what they do with the tax money they do with the money. The government does, but I'm happy to pay taxes.
And also, somebody asked, did Sara ever go back to see the family? Number one. And number two, as time passed, were they bitter about having been endangered by her being with them?
You mean if Sara went back?
Yeah.
She never went back. Yeah.
She never
wouldn't even.
You couldn't mention her. The minute you said, I said, Sara, I even brought her a film. Sara, I went there. By that time, I was about 4 or 5 times, because the Ukraine became independent in 91. I was in 92 over there. And in 90, we put already matzivot, monuments. And in 93, in our town, I put down for them where my father is, and 250 people were buried. They took them. So right away, we put up down there. We went to restore the cemeteries. We did a lot of work. We went over there. And when I told her, it's not nice to say, they should burn like Kean. That's what she said. No. She would never, never go there. But I told her, Sara, it's nice to go to see and do the work, in their memory. She says, I don't want to. I'll do the work here. She said, no, never, never wanted to go. She was as a child, left alone. I knew I wasn't much older, but those days, 3 years made a big difference, So that was the end of my suhale. Yeah.
And I assume
I miss her a lot. I miss her. Yeah.
Oh, it's nice to have her kind of at least memorialized in a movie though now. So that's something to keep with you and see.
Oh yeah.
I assume the bitterness question is maybe because Andy, you mentioned the daughter who was born later and the kind of the exchange you had. Do you know anything in terms of whether they're kind of is that the impression that you got? It came across a little bit when you were talking about that.
About who?
The impression of Sara from the daughter born after.
Yeah, well, yeah, in terms of the family and whether the family felt a sense of bitterness at having been endangered in this way.
Well, they tested her from the very beginning, and Sara was telling me, what they did in Polish. We were speaking Polish with each other, yeah. And so the choice of words she used was. Like a sailor talking, how they were very cruel to her, and she she didn't have a positive feeling toward them, and obviously carried that for the rest of her life. And they tested her by, you know, you can see some of it in the movie, you know, the first day that she was there, and we portrayed this in the film, that they were making sausage and bacon, and we had it. It was a pork roast. So I mean, it looked better, I guess, Steve. You know, the father was, you know, a little crude and was digging in with his hands, so we felt that it was, might say, more powerful visual. But she said that they were doing that, and the mother, you know, the young mother gave her and was pushing this on her. You must be hungry and you eat this. And Sara came from, you know, like most people, came from a kosher home, never got near pork, much less, you know, ate it or wanted to eat it. And she knew that this was like a test. And she said, I just, you know, pretended it was a delicacy, and I just ate it. And this was one. And the timing of when they said you have to go get your papers, this was a big thing. Even my own grandmother was telling me how when they had a domestic come in, everything had to be with papers, because it was a penalty. Sometimes you'd be fined or killed even if people suspected, especially during wartime, you didn't have documents. So this was like a constant threat to her. But I don't think there was any love lost from either side. They had, and Fanny would understand this, you know, they had like brudna Żydówka, like a dirty Jewish girl who lived there. But they didn't at the beginning weren't sure she was, and then she convinced them that she was Ukrainian. And you know, they all went, like my dad and maybe Fanny, to these schools, public school, that everybody spoke the three languages. Polish government formed the schools, but it was only Poland for, at that time, maybe 10 or 15 years after the war, and it was a big population of Ukrainians. So everybody had to kind of speak, you know, their home language, which was Yiddish or German, depending on your wealth. If you were a Jew, Ukrainian speaking Ukrainian and bad Polish, because the parents didn't know, but in school they learned, and the Polish kids speaking Polish and some Ukrainian. And so they could get by in these languages. And so they felt comfortable that she knew that she was Christian, because she could make her way through these services in school, and she said the right things and knew it. Just intelligent, cunning, the way she needed to be to survive at her, by her wits. Again, a very young, in the film we mentioned that she says that she's 14, but in reality, she wasn't even 13 when she was 12 and a half. She was born in the early 30, January 1930, and the ghetto was liquidated in September of 42. So she was 12 and a half, not even 13 yet. And that was what was so impressive to me. So no love lost there. She pulled it off, that she was safe enough that even if they suspected she might have some Jewish roots, that she was Ukrainian, Christian.
But
Right.
she was also afraid in case she's asleep and she's liable to have a dream, and what if she speaks in Yiddish?
Yes, yeah.
That was a
That
nice problem. When I spoke, that was also to me the main thing, because for a while I was also as a non-Jew and Kozianik. So that was the main thing. You're afraid to sleep in case you say a word Jewish.
Yeah, so she said that she didn't sleep for that time that she was there, 18 months, almost 20 months. She stuffed a rag in because she was afraid she'd be found out.
Yeah.
So she was on edge, and she carried that trauma, obviously, the rest of her life.
Right. And that's interesting because, of course, that's represented in the movie where she says Shema in her sleep and the kids notice it, and then she has to sleep with that, to prevent her. So kind of clearly that also represents something that is very much was a concern for these children. It's interesting you mentioned about the how the family tested her, because somebody has mentioned in the questions about the relationship between the two women. which developed somewhat in the movie at least, and how somebody has always said that they found that relationship quite moving, and was interested to know about the extent to which that was based on interviews with Sara or was more fictionalized. But from what you're saying, I think, probably more fictionalized. Would that be correct as it developed?
Yeah, I mean, Steve can maybe talk to it more. The way she described that she was a very young, beautiful woman, and it looked like it got portrayed. The actress who played the mother, Michalina Olshańska, I think when we filmed, she was about 25, Steve, and I think that in real life, the real life character was about 21, and the husband was in his late 30s. So there was absolute tension and intrigue in that relationship, and that she did tell us that there was no ambiguity. Whether they had a good personal connection, I don't remember her mentioning that. And maybe Steve, because Steve interviewed her in depth, I just spent a few hours a couple of times just chatting with her, so he may have a better view.
She was pretty clear about it, that they were not good people, that there wasn't fondness there. But again, this was something when I watched the testimonies and discovered the truth, that the reason why Sara got the job, the reason why there was a job availability, was because the previous nanny had been kicked out by the mother because the father was sleeping, the farmer was sleeping with the previous nanny. And then Sara learned that the mother, Nadia, was sleeping with her husband's nephew. And so to me, those facts I found to be something that we really could focus in on, of this relationship, of this, this triangle, if you will, really, because again, this young child has to harbor their secrets and really know how to play the both of them in the right way. So I think Sara never really gave it that much. I don't know if she gave herself enough credit in terms of how, as Andy put it, how cunning she was, and how she repeatedly made the right decision over and over. She would often say, "Oh, it was luck. It was luck." But I think it's impossible to believe that a young child would she had to have been persuasive and manipulative and convincing in order to pull it off for that amount of time.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's 10:15, at least for us here in Teaneck and on the East Coast. So we should probably begin drawing to a close. I'm just going to ask, actually, Dennis, in terms of the numbers here, do we have statistics? How many people had this type of experience? How many hidden children proportionally, or do we have any such knowledge?
Yeah, I want to respond to your question, but also just briefly to respond to what Stephen and Andy were just saying.
Go ahead, please.
The great paradox here that this film, of course, I think can articulate so effectively is that Jews had to go into hiding, and to acquire the skill of being cunning, the word that we're hearing here, for their survival. But the paradox is that, right, it confirmed to the enemies of the Jews, to the Nazis specifically, that the Jews are, right, a secret cabal and are cunning. And that's the great paradox of a story like this. It only confirmed, right, the suspicions. And yet we know that Jews had to go into hiding and had to be secret and had to be cunning in order to survive. And I just wanted to point out, as we're talking about this, that incredible historical paradox that actually runs through. There's a thread in that history for Jews more broadly, but certainly is brought forth here. In terms of the numbers, it's hard to know. There are many, Fanny, I'm sure you know, right? There are many folks who to this day don't even know that they were Jewish, right? They went into hiding, right? They're adopted by, Christian families. My former boss, Abraham Foxman at the Anti-Defamation League, himself a hidden child. was adopted by a Christian family. It turns out that his own parents, biological parents, fought to get him back, and therefore to confirm that, in fact, you are Jewish. So it's difficult to nail down the numbers on this precisely for that reason. What I can say is that the first Hidden Child conference or international gathering that we organized in 1990 in New York drew 1,600 hidden children. It was a real coming out of hiding experience for so many, folks who really were able to then really confirm and affirm in a much larger kind of context, public context, that they were Jewish and they had this very special experience.
Maybe just close, Stephen, if I can just ask you, I suppose in part you'll be promoting the movie for a US release, hopefully, but what are you working on next?
I'm working on a documentary that has been ongoing for the last few years. And then also Andy and I are developing a limited series for AMC Networks that's based on a true story of two brothers from El Paso, Texas in the late 70s and 80s. One was a criminal defense attorney and the other was a notorious drug dealer. And it's a kind of Cain and Abel type story. And then also currently looking for and working on a couple of projects that will hopefully turn into my next feature film.
Well, best of luck with that. I want to thank you so much, Stephen, Andy, Dennis, and Fania, for really, a wonderful, enlightening talk back. Apparently, despite the late hour, the audience is holding steady. So that is a tribute to you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you doing this for us. And congratulations on a wonderful movie. Finally, then, let me invite everyone here tonight to join us for the next film, Truman and Tennessee, an intimate conversation, coupled with a short called Coded, tomorrow night, Wednesday, November 17th at 7:30 p.m. And indeed, any of the remaining films at teaneckfilmfestival.org. We're now in the virtual part of the festival, so it will all be online as tonight was. Thank you for joining us tonight. And once again, thank you so much to our panel for joining us and being so enlightening tonight. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Don't quit.